This video is a review of the plantings here, some 3 years after the initial plantings in 2008. To facilitate this review, I have divided the garden into some 23 components. These represent separate landscapes. Some of these are discrete landscapes, as seen here, but most of them are part of an overall landscape, as seen here, the entity of which is the Lan Yuan. The plantings you see are part of an evolution, beginning with the original planting plan, but with the various changes that have occurred over the years since then. This review builds on this, and it assesses the plants in all sections on their ability to fulfill cultural, landscape and horticultural performance criteria. This tour starts at the entrance and travels counterclockwise through the garden. The entrance planting overall is good. There have been several revisions over the years, but the concept has remained constant. Here are a few tweaks. Here is a trick showing Jasmine nudiflorum growing a little. As you can see, it'll look great against the rock. This carex conflicts with the rest of the plants both in form and texture. It has to go. While this looks okay now, there is a balance and overcrowding time bomb awaiting with the Aralias. My recommendation: manage the Aralia behind the rock by pruning it. Replace the number 2 Aralia with a new lower growing plant or shrub, otherwise all is okay. On the right side here, all the necessary tweaking has been done. This should all work well in a few years' time. Maybe think about screening the car park here. Area 1 inside the garden needs major changes. It is a potential jungle. There's room for only one tree, and I suggest that the Lagostromia and Cercis go. The present bamboo species doesn't like the climate, while the Vinca minor as a ground cover has got the wrong texture. For one thing, it's too coarse, and in the summertime the flowers are distracting. The key is simplification. One tree skillfully pruned in the future is important. A clean ground cover. Group the azaleas to make a strong formation, and in the future perhaps consider introducing a bamboo which will stand the climate and will create the right effect. Meanwhile, the existing wisteria needs careful management. In this part, the cotoneaster should be encouraged to spread over the wall, while the juniper can be used to knit the rocks together. Area 2 is a comparatively expansive area, some 25 square metres, on the edge of the lake. An important function of this area is to provide room for large trees as a major visual element. These are seen as an upper story element that relate to the surrounding city and mitigates against adverse effects. Pruning these trees is important. The willows need to be tall, but not bulky. Rigorous and constant pruning is needed. The maples need to get their heads above the eaves level, but also to reach down to about head height. The important thing is to see through the stems across the lake. So here you see that the maples have been lifted. At ground level, the plantings are simplified. The hellebores are extended and the Uncinias removed. Area 3 is a discrete landscape that has been changed several times, incredibly for such a small and simple area. This landscape will eventually be dominated by the pine, which will require expert pruning to achieve the right balance with the bamboo and mahonia, which also will require careful pruning. The ground cover here is moss and liverwort. Immediately through the Moongate threshold is Area 4. This landscape requires little change now. The dominant tree is a cherry, the ground cover is epimedium, and an emphasis plant of Jasmine nudiflorum is sited next to the bridge. All that's needed is the removal of the bamboo and the relocation of the juniper. Area 5 is that small threshold landscape immediately over the bridge. Only minor housekeeping is needed here as shown. Acorus gramineus is a great success in the garden, and it's ideal around the edge of the lake. It is a critical threshold in the garden, marking the end of the rock mountain, the edge of the eastern gallery, the southern arm of the lake, and the Thungum Shan Bridge. This connects to the northern gallery. The housekeeping here is needed to consolidate and simplify the plantings and to aid in its coherence. The lower parts of areas 6, 8, 10 and 11 all rise steeply from the path at the edge of the lake. This part of these areas will be discussed consecutively next. In looking at the rock mountain, I would like to briefly discuss vegetation. This can be divided into three physical types in visual impact. These are trees, shrubs, and herbs/ground cover. The impact of trees is the greatest. They alter the structural dynamics of the garden overall. Shrubs alter the structural details of the garden, while herbs and ground cover are more or less textural in influence. In this next sequence, I want first to look at trees already planted and recommend selections for removal and/or retention. The ticks represent retention and the squiggles removal. As you can see, it's a bit crowded in here. Now, I want to demonstrate the effect that these trees have on this mountain landscape in, say, 5 or 10 years. Notice first the proportion of rock to green and also the breaking of the roofline. Notice too the cultural influence in pruning some of the trees. Now we have added shrub planting to the mix. Notice the change in ratio of green to rock. This is intended to demonstrate the nature of change. Human intervention in pruning, culling and replacement will all be part of the process of change. Now consider for a moment the trees even bigger, and they could be. Plainly now they overpower the scene. It is no longer a rock mountain, but a forest. We need to decide what the effect should be, but pruning is going to be a factor. Now I'd like to discuss items of planting detail along the toe of the mountain face, along and above the lakeside path. All the jasmine mesnii are to be removed that are growing along this path. They are too bulky. This tree peony should be the dominant shrub in this area. The Myrtus apiculata is to be pruned as penjing. The planting of crevices with ground-hugging conifers and other species is important to homogenize the rock mountain area. At the same time, the groupings of these box plants give strong relief to the rock formations. Many plants are still too small to notice yet. The pine above will become a feature tree. Jasmine mesnii is to be replaced with mondo grass or liriope in these areas. Here, large shrubs like this camellia and spreading plants such as this juniper will alter the detailed balance of rock and plant. Native Pimelia is ideal in these situations, and here mondo grass or liriope are most appropriate in scale in these locations. An example of how prostrate plants can be used on rock mountain to soften the effect. But there are still plants to be culled. Appropriate use of liriope.